and or hear you from afar. So, recovery basics for parents, recovery in real time. Uh, many of us in the room a couple of weeks ago had direct experience as parents. The rest of us, of course, all were affected in one way or another, and so have interesting perspectives to share. The first thing I wanted to ask, and I do have an updated slide set for you, Stacy, and I'll send that to you along with some notes. But we talked a little bit in the training itself about the oxygen mask theory. And anybody want to give me a couple sentence definition, the oxygen mask theory or method? I actually like to call it a method. And you can respond. Yep, I see you typing, Jim. Yes, indeed. Tend to yourself first. Why is that so important in supporting the recovery of someone else? Why does that matter? Exactly. Exactly. You cannot give what you don't have. Absolutely. So that's why I'm really grateful that you participated in this and why we're hoping to share it with others. Because again, the more resilience we can build in those supporting recovery, then ideally the better we can support that recovery itself and keep moving in a healthy wellness forward facing direction. So here's what we're going to look at today. Over the next hour, and I'm not sure it will take an entire hour with just the four of us on, but we'll give it our best. We're going to look at some keys to recovery support. We're pretty well versed in the principles and practices of recovery itself, but let's look at some keys to recovery support. We'll consider some recovery centered ideas, options, thoughts, queries. We'll look at pathways, your experience with some of those pathways over the last few weeks, if you've had any, or if you've given any additional thought to them since our training, and then responses to those pathways. And then we'll continue with some questions and share our experiences, and then we'll go on about our day and keep putting these practices into practice, I guess. That would be the way to go. So, are you ready? For a lot of people, not just the recovery, but for the people around the recovery, recovery itself can feel like an alien landscape. We get so used to our behaviors and our routines and what looks like normal to us, that when it shifts, it is a change for everyone. So, when we talk about recovery support, I would suggest that there are some keys to providing that support in a meaningful way that can help someone as they discover his or her uh, recovery path and or wellness based future. So, the first one I'm looking at and thinking about is reality. Anybody know what I mean by reality? Anyone want to give that a shot? That's right. That's right. Well, the recovery's reality, and in our roles as supporters, how we can help them see that reality, A, but B, how we will acknowledge what that reality actually looks like. Again, we talk about that concept of denial, especially among those of us supporting. When someone is in active addiction, we make a lot of excuses. I remember the discussion we had around parallel process. While the addict was denying that there was even a problem, we as those affected by the addict were equally in denial in some ways. Oh, it's a teacher who doesn't like him, or oh, I know he's struggling with this, that, or the other thing. So, one of the keys to remember is reality. What is actually happening? And one of the tools that we learned about and that we talked a lot about was that motivational interviewing. So, really keeping the concept of reality top of mind, if you're still in an active place, asking some very probing questions, making sure you roll with that resistance, trying to develop that discrepancy is one way to help move a person toward that reality. Now, after the fact, as they start into early recovery, reminding them about that reality, looking around. Again, keeping that discrepancy alive and well. So you say you want to achieve this in your recovery. Help me understand how you're doing that. What does your room look like? You know, many of us have recoveries who are living in our own homes. So look around. What does health look like? What does wellness look like? What is the reality that we hope to acknowledge, but then hope to create? Does that make some sense? Any response? Yeah, yeah. Helping clear the fog. I like to think of it as the fog. I see Jim's typing, so I'll give him a minute. Yes, yes. The truth without judgment. I love that. I love that. The second one I think about is routines. Again, when we were in a place of kind of a maelstrom where we're affected by the craziness around us and the person is again within our care or not direct care but close enough that it messes with us. The idea of building new routines is pretty important for the recovery, but then for those of us supporting, making sure that we have routines, that we build new routines, that we support the recovery in those new routines. Does that make sense as well? Yeah. Hi, Amby. So glad you're able to join us. So, what, tell me what might represent a shift in that routine and how we might support it. Yep, exactly. If we choose to make some changes in our routines and then we demonstrate we're absolutely modeling that behavior we're looking for, indeed. And we're not just saying nee, 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 which could put us back in a yucky spiral. I'm not sure if the word yucky's ever been used in a webinar. Routes, directions, getting up early, absolutely. Going to new social places, it can be hard and overwhelming. So, in our support roles, being willing to really foster that self confidence for the person that we're supporting. You know, really, you know, I see how hard it is for you to get up and get to that job every day. And I just want to acknowledge that I really appreciate what you're doing for your recovery. And what can I do to help with your recovery today? You know, if it's an honest effort to help, it is not then enabling a bad behavior. It is supporting a good behavior, a good change in routine. Wow, you know what? Your car's at the shop. I'll happily drive you to that meeting, that mutual aid support meeting. That's great. So responsibility, that's a big one. That's a big one. When someone's in an active place, responsibility is one of those places where um, it's a hotbed for resentment, right? Because everybody has personal responsibilities when they get ignored or disdained. We can build up some pretty strong resentments as the people who are affected, the parents specifically. You know, we raise somebody to be responsible and then they're not. And so it can be a place of guilt, a place of shame. So let's talk about a little bit about responsibility. What are some keys about that turn of phrase or that piece of the puzzle as we go about providing meaningful support? How do we change that piece? I love it. A working agreement. Awesome. owning what's ours without yes, exactly. We are not responsible for the other human being in this relationship. Exactly. Prioritize. I hear what Amby's saying, and I hear the word priority. So looking at that recovery wellness plan and, taking a look at what comes first and what are you taking responsibility for? Holding someone accountable. Remember, that's one of our roles. That recovery coaching role is in some ways to be that truth teller and that holding someone accountable for the actions they say they're going to take, right? Not that we're applying to them, but then again, telling the truth to ourselves. What is my responsibility? What's my piece in this? And then making sure that there's a boundary that we've developed, that we're practicing, that we don't cross, um, and that we're working in tandem with each other. Relationships are difficult to begin with. So we're starting a brand new relationship here with someone in recovery. And we are ourselves in recovery from the way we used to be as well. So acknowledging that. And I think it all comes down, and here's the final R I'll leave you with, is respect. Respect. So there's self respect in all of the pieces that we just addressed, but there's that respect for the recovery. Remembering this is about what they want their recovery to look like. How does that look? What does that entail? What do you want? Any thoughts on that? That is for sure. That is for sure, Jim. It won't take place in the first week. All of this is a process. It is a process. And I continue to recover and work on my recovery every day. It's amazing how easy it is to slip. Just like the recovery might be fighting those urges, learning how to manage your urges and cope with the realities of every day. It's an ongoing daily process. And and having our recovery understand that as well. I think communication is key. Any examples that you can raise about that, about the time it takes, or about the thought process that goes into this? Patience. Yes. Yes. Sometimes when I'm on these conference calls, these webinars, I feel a little bit like I'm lecturing, but you're asking questions. I have to remind myself all the time, asking questions. I think that's a tricky spot for parents, that distinction between motivational interviewing and lecturing. I know with my adult kid, he could see it coming. I'd start asking questions. He says, "Mom, you're doing that thing again." I see some typing going on, so I'm just waiting for that. Come on through. Yes, less than perfect. Less than perfect. None of us are perfect. And so if we can remember that, it helps us with all of those R's, because that is the reality. And any of those routines we set for ourselves can be shifted, changed. We do our best with what we have. We meet our responsibilities as we're, an honest effort. And then we respect each other for that humanity. I see. So we'll catch Ambi's comment as it does. I want to move on to the next slide. So, one thing that matters most is that recovery must be chosen and defined by the recovery. And that's, I think we talked about that a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. In our support efforts, how have you considered the recoveries? Okay, let me catch this back from Ambi because respect is something that we as humans say all the time we want, but our definitions are different. Yes. So defining that clearly, what it means to each person, and then defining the actions and behaviors that are being looked for. Learning to speak the same language. Again, we have a word exercise that we sometimes use in the training, and we use homophones because there are a lot of words that sound alike but have very different spellings, meanings. And so without knowing what the person exactly means, you can't guess. You can't assume. So even with something as what we would think is an umbrella word like respect, you're right, Ambi. We really need to make sure that we are clear. What am I looking for? It shows respect to me when you clean up after yourself in the kitchen. That's just one of the things in my house that I know is a real big one for me. So anyway, and that's something I guess I would value. But in this next question, I want to ask about the recovery. How, in our support efforts, have we considered the following things like values, interests, talents, their concerns? What are some of the ways we can do that for our recovery? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Using those tools, really practicing, actively listening, and then questioning, using that MI as needed. And I love Jim's distinction without sliding back into lecture mode. Sometimes our questions can be tinged because we care. We're very, very close. I know that it came up in the training and it has come up numerous times in conversations that much of what we as family members or parents or anyone affected, really much of what we do comes out of a place of compassion and love. And so being gentle with ourselves. I see Ambi and Jim are typing. Yep. Yes, absolutely. If the recovery is choosing his or her recovery, then it is. It's all about their values, their interests, their talents, and of course, their concerns. And as we know, they can be diametrically opposed to ours. The vision we have for someone is not necessarily, in fact, it usually isn't theirs. Absolutely. Absolutely. Asking, 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 asking. Share. What are they? Experience and celebrate them. What's most important? Oh, I love that word gateway. Yes, a gateway into what they want, what they're striving for. Very good point. Hearing their concerns as their concerns and not a reflection on you. That's huge. It's huge. Yeah, that's a great one, Jim. You're right. People are, I, I hear you. Why do you keep bringing it up? Obviously, it's something, and I'm not trying to be judgmental, but yes, you're acknowledging that it is your concern. And it does come from a place of love and compassion, usually. And that's where knowing ourselves, checking ourselves. Remember that oxygen mask method? We talked about it first thing. Take care of ourselves. What's ours? The recovery coach stool I keep coming back to it over and over and over again in so many situations, many of which have little or nothing to do with recovery. But listen well, ask good questions, and the key one, know what to do with my stuff. My stuff. As a person in a supporting role for someone, you know, approaching recovery, practicing recovery, building a recovery that looks right for them, how can we how can we help them see sometimes or acknowledge those talents? What's one of our tools? It's a tangible tool. The recovery writes it, the recovery keeps it, the recovery defines his short term, long term, mid-term goals. Come on, you know it. You know it. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. The Recovery Wellness Plan, of course. It's a great tool because it is it is tangible. And because it's written by the recovery, we don't have to be, like you were saying, make sure that we ask, that we take the time to have the recovery articulate what are those values, what are some of those interests. That recovery wellness plan can tease out a lot of that, right? If we look under which heading they're really eagerly filling in, or they've made some mid-range or short-term goals, that really is a clear, tangible piece of evidence about what matters to them, what captures their interest? Where do they see their talents? And then, again, on the flip side, the parts that they're less eager to fill in can make for some really good, meaty places to start asking questions. Help me understand your hesitancy in this area. What are some of the things you might need or you feel you need to make a goal here? And again, putting these things, prioritizing these things, understanding it's part of a long process. Um, it's a pretty nifty tool for those of us in support roles. It can move us beyond the lecturing into simply the, hey, we're here to check this out. You wrote it. What you got for me today? Any experiences with that, with a either a young person or someone that you've been supporting? All right. Well, I can tell you one. I'll give you a great story. So, my adult child, who's in recovery now over 2 years, he taught himself how to play guitar when he was 15 or 16, and it was one of the things that just really slipped off the radar as he spiraled down and ended up homeless. Um, didn't even have a guitar, and so shortly after he got well, he was at a music festival, and I could tell, he just has always loved music. So he put his name in a drawing for a guitar. One of the local radio stations was offering this guitar. And sure enough, he won it. He won it. And so it immediately became this really cool, personally chosen interest and also a talent. And so it gave us a neat place for conversation and a neat place for that person to focus some energy while they were rebuilding what the rest of their life looked like. So acknowledging the interest and then supporting that talent, just every time I'd hear the practicing going on, wow, that sounds pretty neat, or can you tell me about what you're writing, or where do you anticipate getting your first gig if you choose to go do that. It became a really neat place to focus some of that energy. So let's look at the power of story, because again, this is huge. Our story, our person that we're supporting story. I am more than my addiction. All right, I'm throwing that first question out there. How do you respond to this statement? Anyone? All right. Oh, yeah. Yes. In fact, the slides for this webinar were actually created way, way long ago. And so when you brought that up in the training, Ambi, I really, I did smile and appreciate that so much, that there are so many more pieces to a person. What or who are you? Yeah. Yeah. So what are some ways that in a support role we can do that? How can we ask that question? What are some of the tools we can use? Yep. Yep, yep, yep. A lot of positive reinforcement to the pieces that we see. Yep. And even that can be, even our positive reinforcement can sometimes be overwhelming. So again, balancing it. Because our enthusiasm, when we see a young person get into recovery and we immediately assume that they're going to like suddenly reach their potential. So we go all the way back to that process piece we talked about early is, you know, responding to it in a way that's positive and thoughtful, but not overwhelming. Again, what's our stuff? How excited I am to see you get well. But there's a balancing act. Yeah. Yes, it is. Why is that? Why is it that we as humans, we slide to the negativity? I think all the way back to the RCA when we do the stigma and labels exercise, and how quickly those negative words come out. How quickly? How quickly? Yes, that's a great point. The evidence is unfortunately often more clear. Yes, we can be absolutely awesome and you don't even see it. But when we're dismal, when we're awful, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's pretty obvious. So, as someone's rebuilding their recovery, as someone's moving into it and becoming more than their addiction, some of the evidence then, some of the evidence of positivity, what might that look like that helps us reinforce their new story? What roles do you have in your life? Help me understand that a little more, Jim. What do you mean? Yes. Yeah. Asking questions. What are you doing? Yeah. Brother, son. Thanking. Oh, that's gorgeous. Sorry, they sort of blended for a minute for me, Ambi. I didn't catch all of yours. And yes, thanking them for the changes you feel in yourself as a result of them being in your life. That's kind of neat, helping them reframe their story by the impact it's having and sharing that positive impact. That's gorgeous. Thank you. And thank you, Jim. Yes. Yes, work positively. What yes. What are you doing? Nice. Yeah, asking questions. And I think that next question, our own experience when we bring it and we acknowledge it's ours, that is what makes it difficult to do that in a forward-facing manner, right? I mean, as a parent, you've watched that downward spiral or your own pain comes out. So moving forward in that positive manner is so important to helping them reframe their story and helping them understand that you see, you're a witness to that story. I love how you phrase that, Amby. Thank you. What other tools? What now let's get specific. What tools as people supporting recovery, what can we use to encourage and or support that rewrite for the person? I think Amby pointed one out beautifully, and acknowledging roles is another one. Great point. Great point. There is often yeah, yeah, yep. And showing it, reflecting it right back to them. I see you're really working this part of your recovery wellness plan. Absolutely. I see how you're rebuilding your life. That is so key, Jim. Yep. It is hard for them to talk about themselves positively sometimes. Helping them understand that judgment, that we as people in support of their recovery have moved beyond that place of judgment, that place of resentment, that place of recrimination. That's really hard. That's our work. That's ours. Again, there's that third part of the stool. We're asking questions, we're listening really well, and we're actively working to manage our own stuff and being honest about that. I think being honest about that is uh is important. Helping them understand that recovery, guilt is inherently a looking back emotion, right? Because it's all about stuff that already happened. Moving forward is all about hope. Moving forward is all about, you know, laying that aside. Say, I'm not looking at any more I'm sorry's. I'm looking at, wow, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing. And I'm curious, Margaret, if you mean also your own personal recovery wellness plan. I actually read that both ways when I went back and reread that. So the recovery is working his or her recovery wellness plan, but then we as a support person, if we're working our own, you're right. That's a great way to demonstrate that rewrite. Each group member, sometimes it is hard to recognize it in themselves. Ah, nice. They starred the ones they believed or had shared experience back with. It's nice. Yeah. Yes. And thank you for clarifying, Margaret. I so appreciate that. I remember there was a very interesting birthday tradition in one of my young people's schools, and they had a birthday scroll. And it sounds a lot like what you're describing, Amby. Everybody at the top of the scroll, they would put the person's name. And each person in the class at some point in the day would go over and add that kind of affirmation, something they believe that person had done that had impacted them positively. And at the end of the day, as they regathered, they shared that scroll, and the person felt valued. The person felt really valued, and sometimes saw things that they didn't even realize they'd done or how they'd done it. And I love that. There is great power in that affirmation. So yes, the story that we're writing is, we go all the way back to the first thing we talked about, relationships. We are in relationship with others. So our story is our story, but it's impacted, it's colored, it's shaped by the stories that we impact, like the other people around us. So that we're in relationship too. So any last thoughts on that? The power of story before we move on? Ah, it's a good one. I'll tell you, it never ceased to make me the witness just well up. So uh, so let's look at multiple pathways. This is always a good one when we're supporting someone else. And I love the story that came out. There was a mom who was describing and I'm spacing right now. I'm having a moment where I'm spacing her first name. So if anybody pulls it out and reminds me, that will be wonderful. But she went, "Aha." It was literally an aha moment as we're going through pathways and we started talking about yoga and mindfulness and meditation, and she said, "Oh, it's it's just a pathway." And she was concerned because her daughter, as she was moving into recovery, was choosing things that to the mom looked a little confusing. Um, but as we explored it a little more, she said, "Oh, it's just a pathway." So that was a great experience. Multiple pathways. What's been your experience? What's been your experience with this concept? Hmm. It certainly has. Yes, they can choose something other than 12 step. And I love that word empowered, 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 empowered. Yes, yes. Thank you, Amby, for pointing out that part. It's part of our advocacy effort as people supporting recovery, is articulating and expanding that understanding, that acceptance, yeah, that willingness of people who've been pigeonholed, who've been in one place, expand, 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 expand. Um, and sometimes in that expansion, it's unusual. There'll be places that crop up that are equally as restrictive, while they may be following a different pathway, if you will. It's still just one. So the idea of, I'm of opening it up, that there are many ways to the same place. I can think of no fewer than 5 different ways to get from my house to the park that is literally just behind it. I can think of 5 ways that I can go. I see Jim is typing, so we'll wait just a sec. Yes, yes, they're not mutually exclusive. Absolutely. Absolutely. I can do 12 steps and I can meditate, and they have a coupling effect. They kind of exponentially helpful in many ways. Yes, 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 yes. And so now, again, going back to our roles as supporters, how do we support? How have we supported? And the bigger question here, if not us, then who? Exponential, yes. I think I'm probably a little attuned to those words. My 14-year-old is taking an algebra final as we speak, so I must have those mathematical terms in my head. So if not us, then who? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Other members of the recovery community who are willing to help. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes. And that's why, I guess I put my advocate hat on when I talk like this, but I'm willingly acknowledging it's my stuff, is that as we are actively building this recovery community, we expand, and then we, again, there's that exponential word again. We expand exponentially the number of helpers around who can support multiple pathways by living them, by demonstrating them, by helping someone explore one of them. If it's not us and we don't get it, well, then how awesome is it that a recovery community center has this as an offering? Or my neighbor who's also in recovery. Yes, yes, yes. Resource Connections, an awesome resource, him or herself. Absolutely. Absolutely. And building those communities of support. I love the phrase recovery oriented systems of care, systems that include all parts, all parts. Our bodies don't work with just one part. We are a complex system. So acknowledging and finding, if we're a person who's supporting a person in recovery and we don't understand a pathway or they want to explore a pathway we're not familiar with, absolutely seeking it, helping find somebody who is more versed in exploring it with them, connecting them to that. That's our connector role. And then finding it for ourselves too. Again, taking the time to understand a pathway that we don't understand. That's a piece of our own recovery, right? When I get myopic and I think my way is the only way, I'm not going to be a very big support to somebody else. So, wow, all right, tell me more about refuge. What is that about? How did that come? Where'd that come from? So things like that. Any last thoughts before we move on that one? Okay. All right. All right. These are the tangibles. How, in your support of someone in recovery, have you helped with goal setting? How have you helped with goal setting? Hmm. So, oh, I see some people typing, so that's great. Yes, 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 yes. Asking, and working on the wellness plan. That's one. Sometimes it can be extremely, let's see. Yes, sharing our own wellness plan. And sometimes it can be something very, very practical. So again, my adult young person who is still in recovery, when he was building that recovery for himself, he had a goal. He wanted to achieve a certification. It took a long time to do it. There were academic requirements and then there were practical requirements. One of them was an internship. And so providing some of the very practical tools that were necessary for that person to reach that goal um, were things like computer space and time, right? So that there was a mutually shared computer that I was able to offer. Here, you have access to this. It is not yours, but you have access to this, and I am happy to support your efforts. Making sure that there was time allotted, making sure that there was something as simple as food in the house was a way that I could help with some of those goals. I'd like to eat more healthily. Okay, what does that look like for you? Well, these kinds of things. Okay, so ways that I could support that were not manipulative or difficult. They were very practical. They're very practical. And that leads into that question of recovery capital. How, in your experience, have you supported a recovery as they identify, quantify, and accumulate those resources? Yeah, yes. Yep. Yep. Cheerlead. Again, I love Ambi when you talk about writing those lists. Yeah. Sometimes if they're a word person and they respond to seeing, writing, hearing, sometimes creating those lists of, okay, what do you have? What do you need? How are you going to get it? And then acknowledging when they do, that's a nice piece as they start to accumulate those resources. I'm happy to say that that young person does have the certification in hand, and it has led to jobs. So that's a very good thing. Now has that as a resource. Ah, Well, they may thank you later. I worked in education, so many of my young people come back and tell me things well after the fact. Miss Blair, we really hated when you, but now that we're a little bit older, we see why you did, and we're grateful. Yes, tangible progress. Yes, yes. I love that. Tangible progress. It's the steps along the way for especially those longer term goals. Absolutely. Absolutely. Offering that positive reinforcement. I see you said you wanted to do this, this, and this, and I get that you've done this much to get there. And wow, look what's under your belt now. Look what you've learned. Look what you've done. Yeah. They're going, yes, yes, they're going to fail, but you'll be with them to help them back up and move forward. They can, and they have gotten up, and they have moved forward over and over and over again. It's a great place for strategic use of personal story as well. I have my fair share of failure, and that's for sure. Looking at what is recovery capital, helping them acknowledge what they have. What did they learn from that experience? A, you learned that you're pretty resilient. B, you learned who some of your friends are. C, you learned some of the practical tools you're going to need for next time. Oh, and look at that. You have a couple of them now. You have a license. You can drive. Or you have financial resources to buy a bus pass. These are important, pieces of that recovery capital. And people start in different places. Some people start with a plastic bag full of every living thing they have. And some people start with a great number of resources. So helping them identify them. Sometimes I find it more difficult to work with yes, yes, yes. You look a lot more well rested lately. I wish I could say that, but that's okay. But like I say, sometimes I find it more difficult to work with the people who come to me who have actually a great number of resources. And sometimes building from nothing is actually uh, easier than starting with so much and figuring out what is of value. And again, how's it working for you? How's it working for you? How you putting that how you putting that support effort? How you doing? This is that time when again sharing with each other. And again, I'll encourage anyone who's listening to this after the fact to reach out to someone on this mailing list and just check in. And how is it working for you in your support efforts of a young person in recovery, of a child in recovery, of a young adult in recovery? How is it working for you? That's a loaded question. It can be hard. Support roles are hard, and so reaching out to each other is something I would encourage. Something I do regularly. Any last experiences? Anything anybody wants to share um, as far as how it is working for you? Well, I'll share sometimes that it's two steps forward and one step back. I have a college age adult living in my home right now who is trying to figure out what's next. And while he's not necessarily in personal recovery from alcohol or drugs, I know he's in recovery from, being an adolescent into moving into adulthood. I think that's always an interesting thing. And it's frustrating at times. I'll be honest. I'll be very, very honest. So I have to go back. And I love what Art always says that we teach what we most need to know ourselves. And so reminding myself that I'm a person in long-term recovery. I have my own work to do, that I am in a support role, that I am not the architect of another person's recovery. That's right. That's right. Not getting attached to the outcome myself. Exactly. That's it. I'm responsible for my life, what my life looks like. Reminding myself. and sharing that with peers. Very, very important. I have a support network that, you know, yeah. Yes. Yes. Well, I can't take credit for that, Amby. Thank you so much. I heard that first from Art Woodard, who is often the voice behind many of these webinars. So I've adopted that myself. And I look at some of the things I like to teach, and it absolutely rings true for me. So, wow, I just want to wrap up and just, oh, I see Jim is typing, so we of course can be generous and share and talk some more. But I really, really appreciate your time this morning. That is something I know is very, very valuable in our busy, busy world. So the fact that you shared with each other and you shared with me, I feel very privileged, very blessed. So thank you for that. Any last questions or comments? Well, yes. Thank you, Jim. Jim says the great part about knowing Art is that he doesn't have to have an original thought. Um, yeah, Art has covered a lot of the bases. A lot of the bases. Yeah, yeah. And he's got such a wealth of resources of his own that he pulls upon. And I've used many of his white bison references over and over and over again as well. So again, as we wrap up, in our homage to Art and our homage to CCAR, thank you very, very much for hosting and allowing us to do this work together. Any last questions, any comments, any thoughts? No, thank you, Jim. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. A great way to start the day. I think so. I feel inspired. I'm ready. I'm ready to go be a support person to myself and others. Thank you, Stacy, of course. Awesome. Not sure. That will be totally up to Stacy. I'm willing and happy to talk anytime. And as I say, keep using this network of people that is starting this conversation. You know, recovery basics, recovery basics, recovery basics for all of us in support roles. So, well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful morning. I will hopefully see many of you soon and or talk before then. So, thanks again.